So, what exactly is consciousness? I mean, why does it feel like something to be you right now? For centuries, that question has been one of the biggest challenges in all of science. Well, today we're going to dive into a new theory that tries to put the existing puzzle pieces together into one coherent picture of awareness. Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with why this is such a tough nut to crack. Then we'll build up a new integrated architecture step by step. We'll zero in on the key ingredient, this thing called the predictive self-model, and unpack how it might actually generate felt experience. And finally, we'll look at what this all means for the future. All right, let's get into it. Section 1, the consciousness puzzle. Why is subjective experience so darn hard to explain? It all boils down to this really simple but incredibly profound question. It's not just about how our brains crunch data, right? It's about the quality of an experience. Think about the redness of red or that sharp pang of anxiety. How in the world do these subjective feelings, what philosophers call qualia, come from a bunch of neurons firing? That's the mystery. Now, it's not like we're starting from scratch. We've got some really powerful theories on the table. You've got Integrated Information Theory, or IIT. The idea here is it gives us a way to measure a system's capacity for experience, basically its potential to feel anything. Then there's Global Workspace Theory, which is all about how some bits of information get selected for conscious access, kind of broadcast across the brain so we can report on them and act. And finally, you have Predictive Coding, which sees the brain as this amazing prediction machine, always trying to guess what's coming next and updating based on errors. But here's the catch. Each of these theories, as powerful as they are, leaves a gap. IIT doesn't tell us about the content of an experience. Global Workspace Theory doesn't really explain why having access to information should feel like anything. And Predictive Coding, well, it doesn't fully explain how a simple prediction error turns into the rich feeling of, say, surprise or pain. So that's the big question, right? How do you take capacity, access, and this idea of subjective meaning and actually fit them all together? How do they create a single unified experience? That brings us to Section 2, an integrated architecture. We're going to look at a model that tries to do exactly that, assemble the pieces into something that makes sense. And that model is called the Integrated Workspace with Subjective Modeling Theory, or IWSM for short. Now, the most important takeaway right off the bat is this. IWSM says consciousness isn't one single thing. It's not a monolithic block. Instead, it's an emergent property, something that arises from the synergy, the interplay of three different core processes, all working in concert. A really helpful way to think about these three parts is with a theater metaphor. So first up, you've got integrated information, or PHI. Think of this as the theater itself, its size, its acoustics, its whole structure. This determines the potential for a rich experience. Then you have the global workspace. That's the spotlight on the stage, picking out what's important, highlighting the main event for everyone to see. And finally, the most interesting part, the predictive self-model. This is the audience. It's the part for whom the whole play actually has meaning. Without the audience, it's just lights and sounds on an empty stage. Okay, let's dive deeper into that third piece. Section 3, the predictive self-model. This, you could say, is the architect of your entire inner world, and it's probably the most critical piece for explaining what subjectivity is all about. So, why does a self-model matter so much? Well, think about it. Your experience of the world isn't like watching a movie, is it? It's not a passive video feed. It's an active, constantly running simulation. It's basically a story your brain is telling itself, about itself. And for any story to make sense, it needs a main character, a protagonist. For an experience to feel like it's happening to you, your brain has to have some kind of model of what you even are. And this self-model isn't just one thing, it's actually built up in layers, like an onion. At the very bottom, you have the core self. This is that basic, fundamental feeling of just being an organism in a body. It's grounded in all those signals from inside, like your heartbeat, hunger, that sort of thing. Then, layered on top of that is the extended self. This is your story, your narrative identity that stretches through time, built from memories, your goals, who you are to other people. And at the very top, we have the meta-self. This is the reflective part, the layer that lets you think about your own thoughts, to have feelings about your feelings. It's what we call metacognition. Okay, so we've got the architecture set up, we have the theater, the spotlight, and the audience. But now for the million-dollar question. Section 4, how experience emerges. How do we get from all this neural machinery to the actual subjective feeling of being alive?
All right, the core engine of IWSM is a mechanism called prediction error tagging, or PET for short. And the central idea is really elegant. It says that conscious experience doesn't come from your brain just passively processing what it expects to see. No, experience arises when the self-model evaluates a mismatch, a surprise, something unexpected between its predictions and what's actually happening.
Let's make this concrete. Imagine you walk into your kitchen. Your brain's self-model, based on habit, predicts there's a green apple on the table. That's step 1, prediction. But step 2, your eyes see a red tomato instead. Mismatch. This creates a prediction error signal. Now for step 3, waiting. Your brain flags this error as important. It's a strong, reliable signal from your eyes. Because it's important, step 4 happens. The redness error wins the competition and gets broadcast into the global workspace. It's now in the spotlight. And here's the magic. Step 5, evaluation. The self-model takes in this broadcasted error and processes it. According to this theory, that whole dynamic process of evaluating the error, that is the conscious experience of seeing red.
And this brings us right back to qualia, that term for the subjective character of an experience. What IWSM suggests is that qualia aren't some spooky, mysterious add-on. They're not some ghost in the machine. They are simply functional states. The redness of red is just what it feels like when the self-model does the specific job of processing that particular kind of prediction error.
So the model breaks down qualia along 2 different dimensions, or axes. On the one hand, you have valence and intensity. You can think of this as the how much it matters axis. A really big, surprising prediction error is going to feel incredibly vivid, maybe emotionally charged. On the other hand, you have phenomenal tone. This is the what it's like axis. This is all about which specific parts of the brain and self-model are handling the error, and that's what makes the experience of seeing red feel totally different from the experience of feeling pain, even if they have the same intensity.
This also helps explain something really cool called learned texture. Think about an expert wine taster, a sommelier. Why is their experience of tasting wine so much richer and more detailed than mine or yours might be? Well, it's because through years of practice, their self-model has built up incredibly refined and detailed predictive maps for wine. They can detect tiny prediction errors that a novice would miss completely. And evaluating those subtle errors is what creates that richer, more nuanced, subjective experience. Their qualia literally have more texture.
Okay, moving into our final section, predictions and possibilities. Because look, any good scientific theory has to do more than just tell a good story. It has to make predictions you can actually go out and test. So let's see what this model suggests.
So IWSM makes some really specific, testable predictions. For one, it suggests we should be able to poke and prod these 3 components separately. Maybe we could temporarily disrupt the part of the brain linked to the metaself and see if someone's ability to reflect on their feelings changes, while their basic bodily awareness stays the same. The model also gives us a new way to understand altered states. Dreaming, anesthesia, even psychedelic trips could be explained by specific changes to these components. A psychedelic experience, for example, might be what happens when the self-model's predictions are weakened, letting a whole flood of raw sensory information, of prediction errors, rush in. And of course, a framework like this inevitably leads us to one of the biggest questions of our time. Could an AI become conscious? What does this model have to say about that? Under this model, the answer is pretty clear, at least for now. Today's AIs, things like large language models, they might have something that looks a bit like a global workspace, their attention mechanisms, and maybe a substrate with some level of integration. But there's one giant piece that's completely absent, the predictive self-model. They are absolutely amazing at modeling the world, at predicting the next word in a sentence. But they don't have a model of themselves. They don't have that layered, embodied sense of being an agent to whom things are happening. And according to IWSM, without that, there's no audience for the play. There's no subjectivity. So let's just recap the core ideas here. First, consciousness isn't one thing. It's a team effort, a synthesis of capacity, access, and self-modeling. Second, that predictive self-model is the real architect of our inner world. It's what gives raw information meaning. And third, the felt quality of an experience, the qualia, isn't some extra magic dust. It is the very process of the self-model grappling with significant prediction errors. And that leaves us with a pretty powerful final thought. What if the so-called hard problem of consciousness isn't this one single, impossible mountain to climb? What if instead it's more like a complex but ultimately solvable puzzle? A puzzle about architecture, about figuring out exactly how these different functions all fit together,
to create the unique and amazing experience of being you.